nearly 200 members in the group now. And the idea is just to combine the chemical sciences or molecules with poetry. Yeah, we'll have different themes, and I'm happy to see where it all goes. My vision was to have various collections published one day, but we'll see. Really, I just was very excited about bringing people together who kind of operate at this intersect between disciplines, because I'm always wonderfully surprised about the results of combining these fields. You get something far better than quite dry science often. Yeah, but we'll see where today goes.
There's a huge link between science and art and writing nowadays, isn't there? Seems to have really taken off.
Absolutely, yeah. And we all have our own kind of creative processes, and as a chemist, and if you're looking at synthesis and how materials are constructed in nature or in the lab, that's also very creative, because you can stitch things together in different ways. It's like Lego, basically. And maybe that's how you might approach a poem, I don't know. The theme for tonight then was molecules for a sustainable world. Don't worry if you're not really hitting that perfectly. It's a fairly niche theme, I suppose, but we'll see where we go. Some ideas I thought about were, I suppose you've got COP27 and the political situation. Where does technology fit into that? In my own research, I look at, as well as my drug discovery, I look at designing more biodegradable pesticides, for example, that persist less in the environment and break down more easily. So there's this idea of being greener or kinder to our planet. And you can tune in kindness into our molecules if you think about it. So that's an area of science that's emerging, and for me it deserves poets to think about that. But there are many other themes you may think of. Water purity and contamination there, perhaps. But we'll see. I'd love to hear what your take is on it.
I go a bit oblique, I think.
Oblique is good.
The poem I'm going to read came out of a project that was run between the Norwich Research Park and the National Centre for Writing in Norwich. So they teamed up scientists with writers from different genres, and topics were things like soil, food production, plant resistance to disease, and it was really fun because we were working with expert scientists, and we got the chance to ask them all sorts of weird questions, and go to their research place and talk to them and have interactions with them that kind of resulted in the poems that we wrote. So that was really fun, because it was surprising for us and it was really surprising for them too. And you can kind of see how creative they are at what they do, and they quite enjoyed that we wanted to get the technical details right as well. We didn't want to just have poetic license and make it all up. We wanted it to be as correct as it could be while also being playful. So it's a really nice exchange. It was good fun.
Sounds brilliant. I think Tanya Hirschman, oh no, not Tanya, Alison Hallett had a residency on Iceland, is it Iceland, an ice station, and did a body of work around that.
Tanya writes a lot about science as well,
And
so she's very interested in, she's excellent.
She's had some great residencies.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, how far you go to include that technical language.
Mhm.
And it's interesting staying true to that. Can be a challenge sometimes in the form that you particularly like for your poem.
Mhm.
Wow, that sounds really exciting.
It's also nice to have a different kind of pot of words to dip into.
Mm.
So rather than going for the usual, there's all these wonderful, long, sometimes complicated, but extremely precise. The vocabulary there, I just think is wonderful to kind of experience. And there's lots of words that I'd never heard of. And when you hear them, it's like, wow, and you sort of imagine what it might be, and then you find out what it really is. And yeah, so it's a really nice learning process. And it's an experiment as well. You're playing around in that sphere kind of together. So it's fun.
Mm. I've got my pen and notebook here to be inspired.
Yeah, I remember speaking to Adam Horowitz once, and he said the chemical language has a kind of music to it when it's read, and he was really surprised by that, wonderfully surprised. So let's see, yeah.
And a musicality which is fabulous.
Yeah. And you wouldn't necessarily think that at first thought. Fantastic. Well, that's kind of setting the scene. I don't know who fancies reading first. I know you were keen, Heidi, for me to share the screen, if that helps.
Yes, yeah.
I'll
Or
try
I
and do
can.
that. Or you can. Feel free.
Yeah,
That might be
I
easier.
think you might have to enable it for me.
Yes. Try that. Does that work?
Yeah, that looks like that's going to work.
If you
Okay,
want
so
to go first, that is, yeah.
Before I share the screen and kind of reveal the poem, I'll just give a wee bit of background to it.
Please do, yeah.
So like I said, I was part of this project where we were teamed up with scientists, and the scientists I was teamed up with was looking at rice blast fungus, which was not something I was familiar with. But it was really fascinating talking to him because he said that rice blast fungus is actually a massive worldwide problem that's making huge problems for rice and food production and families and businesses all across the world. And his work is to try and generate rice and try to modify rice so that it's resistant and so that the spread of disease doesn't keep exponentially growing as it is. So I'll read a little bit that he told me. The pandemic pathogenic plant fungus, Magnaporthe oryzae, rice blast fungus, rice rotten neck, destroys crops that would otherwise feed 60 million people every year. It devastates smallholders, farmers, and families worldwide, especially in food-deprived countries. Its spread is escalating across continents, and a related disease is a major threat to wheat. Scientific consortiums are urgently trying to curtail it. So when I was writing this poem, we were in the midst of the pandemic. So this idea that there's something that's rapidly spreading across the world and is a threat to, all of humankind, basically, was sort of in my thoughts anyway. So when I was penning the poem, I was thinking about the spread of disease and how we sort of battle it and how that works, and also how disease just wants to survive. It just wants to be its own thing. It wants to take control and kind of be in charge. So I came up with a poem which is a contrapuntal, which is a relatively new form to me. And contrapuntal comes from a music term, which means kind of contra, against itself. So it's a cleave poem. It's in 2 columns. and the columns are kind of meant to be read together and kind of not. And it sort of amused me that it's a reading of dis-ease. So I will share the screen, you can see what I mean. Okay. Can everybody see that? Oops. Okay. So it's called It Comes Through the Air, a Contrapuntal. And there's a quote at the beginning: the rice blast fungus, Magnaporte oryzae, is a textbook example of a rapidly adapting pathogen. It comes through the air. Like any organism, disorder, it just wants to survive. Endurance, fits. It creates its own flaw, fissure, fault, gaps, to enter the host, open, deepen. Low and gentle at first, quiet, slow. The pathogen steals in, sidles, transfers, into and pegs itself among the timeline of cells through walls, perspectives, and into next cells, framework. Not a prison, but a field that breaks out, enclosed but borderless, and merges. The exact point at which everything complicates, also escalates, is unspecified, coverage unidentified. The disease knows its business, which discharges and executes it irreversibly. When I say poor weather, I mean lack, the opposite of rain, of hydration. Hot, dry, thirsty, parched. Your collar too tight, your neck weakened, itchy, shockingly choked, lessened. Your survival quieted, plagued. Its offspring broadcast, transmissible. It cultivates, recurs, breeding. It ranges, pervades, options. We adapt, it adapts, increasing. We acclimatize, it competes, resisting. We evade, it contends, reducing. We develop, it matches, vulnerability. Repeat, morph, mutate, virulence. Adjust, revise, change, triggers. Rework, amend, defamiliarize, catching, seizing. Exchange, transform, evolve, contagion. Only constant adaptation, stratagem, attack, can succeed, avert, an ever-evolving, durable, communicable, opposing species, survival. Compulsion, pressure, preempts, rupture, occurrence, incapacity. Transition, strikes, outcome. Invasion, inoculum. Unyielding, variable, variables. The air is unavoidable, negotiable. So the two different columns, the one on the left-hand side is a kind of creative reimagining of how the rice blast fungus actually attacks the plant. And on the right, it's different phrases about disease, basically, but they're kind of interwoven with each other and sort of against each other as well.
Wow.
I'll go back to the beginning.
That was amazing.
I'll pop a link to the project in the chat, because there was some really nice, somebody did a short story that was amazing about oranges and the difference between kind of drinking orange juice and the experience of eating an orange, you know, both physically and then sensations, but also to your body and kind of the nutrients that it takes in or doesn't take in. So really interesting pieces. So I'll pop a link to that in the chat.
I kind of really felt that the fungus there was alive and it was coming for me almost. It's so amazing.
Well, that's part of the thing that really interested me about it, was it's just trying to do what we all want to do. It's just trying to keep itself going. It's just trying to, you know, kind of propagate and enjoy its life in a virusy, fungusy way. So yeah, that drive to continue, I thought was really interesting. So,
I love the communication between the two sides, and so a different voice for each of the sides, that but at the same time that dialogue's going on and moving forward, and a lot of hope as well.
When I first drafted it, I had 3 columns and it just became unmanageable. It was too much. But it was interesting. It's fascinating to put together, and I had a lot of fun. It was like trying to do a sort of a puzzle in different dimensions.
Yeah.
But it was interesting talking to the scientist as well, because I asked him lots of strange questions like, what does the fungus smell like? What does an infected plant smell like? And he said, oh yeah, that's really interesting. We don't normally, you know, ask those kind of questions. And I said, you know, if it had a personality, what would it be like? And he kind of looked at me a bit strangely, and then he said, well, actually it would be sneaky, because it sort of it lures the rice into a false sense of security, and then by then it's already too late. So it was a really interesting discussion.
Amazing.
Interesting.
Was this kind of a new venture for you? Perhaps you might want to explain kind of a bit more about your poetry in the wider context. And
I have written about science quite a bit, but I'm not a scientist. I'm just really fascinated by it. When I was first starting out, I wanted something to write about, because I got very frustrated with just chasing an individual poem and then another individual poem. And one of my friends was writing obsessively about dolls, and I thought, I want something I can kind of enjoy and expand into. And I loved science at school, though I stopped when I did O-levels. And I went into the arts, because you have to decide, don't you, which is, I'm not a fan of that. I think you should be able to do both of them, and, you know, all that kind of thing. But then I approached the Science Museum. They had at the time something called the Dana Centre, which was an outreach kind of organisation, and said, did they fancy a poet in residence? And they said, go on then. So they would set me a topic, and it could be space, or emotional contagion, or silver, or the Northern Lights, and I would write a poem or two to go on their website. And I just loved the variety of trying to find a way in and trying to find something that interested me, and playing around in a different kind of arena. So over the years, I've written different types of poems about science, because I just find it really interesting. So when this project came together, they kind of said, oh, do you fancy having a go at this one? And it was quite challenging at the start, because, you know, rice blast fungus. Okay, I mean, it's a major thing, and I'd never heard of it. So, but getting to communicate it in a different way, I think was a really interesting and valuable thing to do. So.
well, we're very lucky to have you here in this group. Thank you so much. I'm sure they were very appreciative.
It was really lovely, actually, because I did, when I had a draft, I sent it through to the scientist and said, please tell me if I've picked anything up wrong, because I don't want it to be inaccurate. And there was one, the actual Latin version of the name had been updated slightly, because they discovered a new strain. So he did ask me to change that, but other than that, he thought it was, you know, pretty spot on, which was high praise indeed. So yeah, they were pleased, which is good, and interested. So yeah, I think he had fun too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Any other comments from anyone? Or
I'm definitely going to have a go at using more scientific language in my writing, and feeling how well it nudges with the ideas that you had as well, and creating all the imagery. It certainly adds to it rather than distracts. That's really, really interesting. Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you. Yeah. I do find it really inspiring, because I tend, even if it's something that seems quite distant and remote and I don't understand at all, I enjoy trying to find a way to get closer to it and to find my own kind of interest in it and my own angle towards it. And it always makes me write things that I wouldn't have written without that bit of grit in the oyster to kind of get me creating something in a slightly different direction. So yeah, look forward to seeing what you come up with.
yeah, I think as well as the kind of two almost hemispheres, the way the poem's constructed, it's interesting Helen mentioned hope. You've also got then the kind of relentlessness almost of the almost scary nature of the you know, the fungus, and those two are opposing, aren't they? And very, very interesting, very, very multi-layered poem. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow. So what do you think, Helen? Have you found something you could share?
I found a couple of poems that I guess I'm going to do one about birth, and then two, and one about the future of birth, because the environment plays such a huge input in all of that, and the stillness between. I think we think it's all rushed, but actually there's a huge amount of silence and stillness.
Yes.
Opening. A gestation reaches its timely conclusion, and her muscled hammock softens, slackens. I am with her wet slit, hands quiet, ready. A head down pressure, spine to belly, her womb now taut as a new balloon. I hear heartbeat, code, pains come, go. A tuft of hair appears, receives to tease. Her skin peels over a spongy first frown, and I map read, headland, suture, fontanelle. A flicker of eyelids, phantom of new. Her hands clutch knees, chin tucks in. I prop her heel on my hip, bear down. A nose tips, bloodline, too early to know. Her guttural sounds deep, old as Eve. I breathe in rhythm between her pushes. A fold of ear unfurls as lips pucker apart. Her fingers reach over, stroke baby hair. I loosen cord, a rough touch can mutilate. A breath-held moment, bruised blue runs to red. Her opening forgotten already starts to close. It took me, thank you, it took me about 10 years and about 36 edits to write a poem that I was really desperate to write about my first delivery as a midwife. And to try and think about the language, but the three processes, so the passenger, the passage, and the power, and to try and put those in each stanza. So it's technical as well as, so each line starts with A, which is the mother, which is the power, and then her, which is the mother, and then I, which is the midwife. So, you know, poetry can be so technical on so many levels, but a challenge trying to put in what you really want to put in some sort of order that still connects with people. So that's probably why it took me so long and so many edits. I'm going to read another one, which is, I had a challenge. Oh, my book Fontenelle. It's back to front, isn't it? Fontenelle. It was a bit of a challenge because I wanted to write about birth. What would that look like in the future? And, you know, what would our world really look like? So this is a poem I came up with. Birth for Everybody 2050. For your midwife is part angel, cyborg, ordinary. For your organs will not define your roles in birth, for they know everyone will attract viruses and love. For a womb, choose self-made, donated, knitted within. For midwives, no persona labels and marmalade are extinct. For virtual visits, imagine warm hands, data scrutiny, telepathy. For desirable traits and cherubs, click online fetal farms. For bearing, be bold, write a wish list for life and breath and sleep. For feeding, progeny, choose human, plants or creature milk. For advice on tears, bed sharing and co-parenting, take a quiz. For early adopted and surrogate baby, top up on wonderment. For times you can't stop sadness, dazzle days will come. For your birth will not be sanitized, for you are part earth, blessed Gaia, and ordinary.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah.
And I've realized that, you know, even in a couple of years, the language has changed. What a parent is has changed. What a family is has changed. The attention to, I guess, pesticides and the effect of plastic, microplastics in the body, and also the mechanisms, and certainly in the pandemic, how a lot of midwifery was carried out remotely. And so it makes me realize how we are nudging in such different scientific fields, and yet the process will be the same, maybe, or maybe not.
Really
Yeah, it summed it up really well with that. What was it? Everyone will attract viruses and love. Wow, that's a pretty powerful combination.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Yeah. Did you want to say a bit more about your writing and just to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Okay then. I started writing in my 40s after burnout, as many health professionals would know, and maybe many other professionals. And I didn't write about midwifery because I felt it would be what's the word, disloyal and political, and using other people's stories. So it probably took me about 20 years before I realized that I could write by bearing witness. And I think, Heidi, you summed it up, that whatever area we're getting our input from, even if it's a field we know nothing about, or whether it's something we know all about, we can write bearing witness at some level, and so it makes everything much more accessible. And I think it took me a very long time to realize that, and also having your own voice. I think that was something that took a long time, knowing that, you know, what I had to say and write was valid. And I think that's quite common, really.
Yeah, thank you. It's really fascinating. I mean, the process of a birth is like a miracle, isn't it? And you can, every birth, I suppose, is very unique and has its own journey.
And it's a mystery. I think that's what I love about it, that you don't know, you know, there's twists and turns along the way. You have no idea what the outcome will be. And I find that quite remarkable.
Yeah, very much so. And it's interesting you touched on environmental changes and what impact that might have. We'll see.
We will see.
Wow, fantastic. Any other thoughts for Helen? Okay, well, I've got one poem, if that's okay, I could share it. I looked in the garden one day and noticed some snails, so I wrote about the garden snail. I read a paper once that said that they're actually very good for the environment, even though they're viewed as a real nuisance, you know, by some gardeners. They, when their life comes to an end, they can break down and kind of replenish the soil with nutrients. So I tried to write about that. Might try and share my screen. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay, well, this is Dear Cave Soul. And I've put the kind of the journal paper that I read from the 1960s. M. Campion talks about the biology of garden snails. You may or may not be interested in reading that, but I wrote it in a fairly free form, but I did pay attention to syllable counts as I went. Okay. Dear Cave Soul. Garden snail, glands fit to release arms, coat poor soils, mucus glops, grease the ground, tunic strip, fat drips on bitter seas. Your meals give flavone waste, day and night. You made your rural homes. Garden snail, dear cave soul, extend arms, ease rich shade, mantle mass, shell of gold, larval star for old age. Approach life, hum a tune, secrete chalk by your fringe. We label you a pest. Garden snail, act the part, costume on, shake it off. Symbols rush, lines mark out, quirky rolls. Your foot speaks, fabric mends, green hosts cool, standing tall, your new nerve. We learn to admire you. Garden snail, help us out. At the end, dead shells give calcium, gives new life, richer soils, for they ache fungal spores all spread out. Fungi meals, your old thrills. We should celebrate you. Thank you.
Love the idea of a cave soul. I think that's a gorgeous idea. There's some brilliant sounds in there as well as a mucus glops or something. It's like, it's really nice.
Thanks. Yeah.
Mm.
I didn't try and make it too technical. I wanted to write with accessible words. I find my natural place is quite technical, and I tend to go the other way. And try and meet in the middle somewhere, mostly.
There's a real
Nice.
musicality to the to your inline rhymes that come at unpredictable moments in your poem, but it also gives it that sort of movement of and I love the poem where the microscope goes in and out, and you're constantly looking at a bigger viewpoint and then a microscopic viewpoint, and all of the processes that are going on with the moving and the eating and the life cycle. Lovely. I'd certainly, I'd want to read it on the page again.
Oh, thank you.
It's yours and Heidi's.
No, very much so. I mean, feel free, anyone, to post their poems on the Facebook group as well.
That would be lovely.
Thank you so much.
The syllable count gave it a lovely rhythm as well. That sort of smoothness and the way that the snail moves. It's nice that it kind of mimicked that as well.
Well, thank you.
And quite a few unusual words that you wouldn't normally associate with snails, but also sound lovely, read out as well. I love words that you can feel them in your mouth as you're saying them and listening to them. That's a weird thing to say, but whenever I hear a poem being read, I almost I don't know what that says. But yeah, there's a lot of those sort of words in it that are, I guess, very visceral, really.
And I suppose you must see that a lot in your spoken word meetings in Bristol, yeah. That a poem takes on a new life, doesn't it, when it's read?
And the poet does as well. It's quite amazing. Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. Well, yeah, I think we are hitting the theme in different ways. So I think Doreen has a poem, but I'll probably stop the recording before she reads at her request. So I can do that if you like, Doreen.
I have got a poem which is
I'll stop
spontaneous to read.